At InDigital, we know that public safety professionals hold themselves to a high standard. In fact, standard doesn't do it justice. In over 25 years working alongside you, carrying millions of calls over our IP networks, your dedication has inspired us. That's why our ESI Net goes beyond industry standards, not only i3 compliant, but designed to adapt to future development for a network you can count on when it matters most. Learn more at indigital.net.
If Within the Trenches has ever taught you something, open your eyes to what it is like to be a 911 dispatcher, or has inspired you to become one, then help support us and join our Patreon. Get exclusive bonus content, one-of-a-kind swag, discounts on merchandise, ad-free early access to new episodes, and much more. To join, please visit patreon.com/WTT podcast. And if you're an industry partner, we have something for you as well. And now, for the show.
This is Jordan, and you're listening to the Code 7 Podcast Network.
Warning. This episode contains the 3 A's of podcasting: adult content, adult language, and awesomeness. You've been warned.
Welcome to Within the Trenches, true stories from the 911 dispatchers who live them.
Hey, what's going on? This is Ricardo with the Code 7 Podcast Network, and this is going to be episode 570 of Within the Trenches, True Stories from the 911 Dispatchers Who Live Them. This episode is sponsored by InDigital, a leader in next-gen core services, and a shout-out, as always, to subscribers of the podcast. Thank you very much, but all of you who are here and supporting, sharing, all of it. Thank you so much. I wouldn't be able to do everything I do if it wasn't for all of you. So again, thank you. I appreciate you. This episode is going to be a special Imagine listening session. These are stories that I recorded. There's about 30 stories that were written and submitted over 4 different Imagine listening sessions. And there is some audio that was recorded for the very first one. The last 3, I was unable to do recording for those. But for the first one, it is going to be part of this as well. So there's an audio piece as well as the written stories that I've recorded in my own voice. And these are stories from 911 professionals from all over North Carolina. And it's from my time when I was out there. It was just amazing. Powerful stories coming out of there. The 8-hour communications class that I teach, I was out there with some of the best in the 911 profession, and that represent the state of North Carolina. I'm not going to lie, this is going to be a pretty heavy episode, a pretty heavy Imagine listening session. But again, powerful stories, and gives you a glimpse into what these 911 professionals do on a daily basis. Now, a lot of these calls, of course, are calls that people have held in. Some of them were actually recent calls. But of course, with all of the Imagine listening sessions, there's an open mic portion that comes after that as well, and that'll be coming next week. But without further ado, here is episode 570. This is an Imagine listening session out of North Carolina. Imagine watching your son take off on his 4-wheeler. You've witnessed this many times. He rides, he has fun, and all is well. Now imagine you are 911, taking a call from frantic parents who have just found their son underneath his flipped 4-wheeler. You listen to the parents scream while they remove it off his body. You tell them that help is on the way, and you give them CPR instructions. An officer arrives, and you listen as he performs CPR. "Come on, buddy. Come on," is what you hear over the phone. This is what it's like within the trenches of 911. In this episode, you will hear stories from the I Am 911 movement, a movement I started to fight for the reclassification of dispatchers from clerical to protective and bring awareness to the types of calls that 911 dispatchers answer on a daily basis. This is an Imagine Listening session, and we are here together in North Carolina. Now, you heard the warning at the beginning, but I must warn you again and add that if you suffer from PTSD or have suicidal tendencies, you are listening at your own risk. The stories you are about to hear are all true and come from the dispatchers who lived them. While some stories have a good outcome, the majority are horrifying. This is our reality. Your worst day is our everyday. So let's start with a bang. I want you to imagine each story. Become the dispatcher who has taken each call and imagine listening. So before I go to you for any of your stories, what I want to mention right off the bat is that first story that I shared with you, the one that started the I Am 911 movement. I had a moment where a few days after I posted that, I had a trigger. Maybe some of you have experienced a trigger before, maybe not. Or maybe it's just didn't realize that it was an actual trigger. So during that time in 2016, there was a show on Netflix that I was binge watching that had just come out. And it was called Stranger Things.
I love Stranger Things.
All right, okay, good. So I was binging that show like crazy. I had already put this story out there. Spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't watched it yet. There is an episode, and I won't say which one it is, but there is an episode where the sheriff and the mom of this kid who's been missing pretty much throughout the entire season, they find him. He's on his back, unconscious, and the sheriff starts doing CPR. And I lost it. I started crying. I didn't realize, though, why I was fully crying, because I've seen stuff like this on movies before and TV shows and everything. Why am I blubbering at this moment? And then it hit me. This is a trigger. Because here's the thing. That story, I heard your last breath the night you flipped your four-wheeler. I was now watching what I was hearing. Because while I was on the phone helping with CPR instructions, the officer got there before EMS, and I can hear him across the room on the radio. I can hear him running. And I'm on the phone, and I can hear him getting closer because the phone was next to the parents who were giving CPR to their kid, who ultimately did not make it. But I didn't want to hang up. I couldn't hang up. I needed to hear if this kid was going to be okay. Instead, what I hear is the officer taking over CPR, saying something to the effect of, "Come on, buddy, come on." And in that episode is exactly what is happening. He's saying something to that form. "Come on, buddy, come on," as he's giving CPR. So instead of just listening, how a lot of us do, we listen and we put these puzzle pieces together in our heads to formulate what's going on, and sometimes it's worse than what is actually going on out there. Now I'm seeing it right in front of me. That's why I lost it. It's just part of my story. Does anyone have a story that they would like to share out loud?
Okay, some of you guys have heard the story. Most of you have not. It's about 10 years ago. I was taking a call, and I took a call from, I found out later it was the son, but originally I didn't know if it was the father or the son. The man was testing his sports car out, his racing car, and it had jet fuel in it. The tank was in the front. Well, he wound up wrecking his truck and catching the car on fire. All I hear when I answer the phone is the boy screaming. I'm not sure if it's the father or the son, but I finally get the location. And all I hear is, he's dying, he's dying, he's burning up in the car. So I sent what I thought was the right response, and we got everyone there. Till the day, 5 years later, I had no clue that it was the son I was talking to, and it was his father that was burning up in the car. He did wind up surviving the accident, but he died at like 2 or 3 in the morning. I found out on the news. And that call stuck with me for years. 5 years, almost to the day of that call, I met the son in person. I thought the call had left me, and it didn't. The son come and apologized to me for what he said to me that day. And I said, "You have nothing to apologize for, that you were watching your father burn up in his car." And he thanked me for what I had done for him, and told me he really appreciated me being there for him. But I listened to him, his brother, and his father all screaming while he was burning in the car. And to this day, that's probably the hardest call I've ever taken. And what he said about a trigger, meeting his son was a trigger for me. I thought that call was gone. And to this day, I can still hear his screams. And yes, it affects me some days. Some of you have heard my story, others have not. But I called Chris the next day and I said, "Chris, you have to listen to this story or this call to make sure I did everything I could." And he reassured me that I did do everything I could. But it still sticks with me. So everyone, your voice does make a difference. When you think it don't, it does.
Thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you.
I work for Highway Patrol now, but I used to work for a 911 agency. When I picked up the phone, the first thing that the man says to me on the other end is, "I did it." And I didn't know that I could quite understand what he said, so I asked him to repeat himself, because when we answer the phone, we say, "Where's your emergency?" And all the man kept repeating to me was, "I did it. I did it. She's gone." And I said, "Sir, what do you mean she's gone?" And the ultimate result was him and his wife had been arguing, and he shot her. He shot her and killed her. But what stuck with me for the longest time was the baby crying in the background. Not a toddler. You can distinguish the cries of a toddler. The infant that was screaming bloody murder. It ended up being inside the city limits, but our deputies went and helped them. Come to find out, the baby had blood all over it, where the man had shot the mother holding the baby. I dreamt so many nights, and it took me forever to get out of that man where they were located. It didn't, any alley. I couldn't get anything out of the man, and I was on the phone for probably an hour trying to get any information I could. And he would hang up on me and call me right back, and it never failed. The same number would pop up. And when those deputies told me that that baby was screaming bloody murder because the mom was holding him, I just thought to myself, what if that could have been anybody? Why would you do something like that? It sticks with me now.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
We get a lot of calls where people die, but I would say the worst one for me was, it was just a car accident, but it was an overturn, and it was an open line, so I could hear her screaming. Like, she didn't die, but the fear in her voice was like insane, because my father figured he died in a car accident, an overturned vehicle. It was like the same type of accident, so and I couldn't reassure her because she couldn't hear me because it was an open line, but I actually dread car accident phone calls, and we get those like every 20 minutes. So I think that was the worst for me. I could hear people saving her, so it worked out fine. But her screaming let me out and banging against the window, and like, yeah, that was like the worst. It brought up a lot for me.
Thank you so much for sharing.
So I was probably like a month, maybe 2, out of sitting with a trainer on the floor. And Falls Lake is a huge lake, and it's got all these hiking trails and stuff. And I received a call from a lady. She said, this boy just went under. And he was like 8 to 10 maybe. And it was just hard because she was a bystander watching him drowning in the lake. And it was just like, for me, it was hard because I could hear everybody in the background screaming and not being able to get him the help directly to him because he was off the beaten path and had fallen in playing with his siblings. And I remember it was like a day or 2 later, they recovered his body, he had died. But it was just so hard for me to take that one.
Thank you. I talked to you as you had just found your son dead. You had gone outside to smoke a cigarette and found him with a self-inflicted gunshot to the head. I listened to you scream and cry. I heard your neighbor try and pull you away. The whole time you screamed, "My baby." It seemed like a lifetime for help to arrive. Your son was the same age as mine. I am 911. I took a call, and the caller told me she was going to kill herself. Put the phone down, came back 2 minutes later, and told me she put 40 plus units of insulin into herself, then disconnected. I am 911. I took a call one afternoon about a dog attack. My caller was a neighbor stating that 2 dogs were attacking a little girl and her mother in the backyard. The caller and the other neighbors were trying to get to the patients but couldn't because the dogs were still loose in the fenced yard. The caller described the injuries as the mother was bleeding badly from both arms, and one of the dogs still had the 9-year-old girl by the throat. Even though I made sure the caller was safe, I was unable to assist either patient. The little girl died on scene, and the mother had to have tourniquets put on both arms to control the bleeding. At the debriefing, we were informed that this wasn't even the victim's residence. They were feeding and taking care of the 2 dogs for the owner that was out of town. The owners were petitioning for the dogs not to be euthanized because they were service dogs and the child should never have been in the backyard. I am 911. I took a call from a grandparent that had driven in for vacation with her husband and 3-year-old grandchild. The grandmother thought the grandchild was with her husband in their 3-story cottage. The grandfather thought his wife was with the granddaughter. She was seen from the 2nd-floor balcony face down in the pool. This child was pronounced by EMS deceased. I will always remember what the grandmother said. Her twin sister is on the way. This 3-year-old had a twin sister arriving shortly with her parents for a week's beach vacation. I also had a child about the same age at the time. I am 911. One of my hardest calls came while I was still in training. I got an admin line from a Spanish-speaking male. I had to get an interpreter on the line to get him help. I said, "What is the location of your emergency?" He then gave the address. I then said, "What happened?" He said one of his workers hung themselves. I told him, "You need to cut him down." He then said he was not on scene. It then began a process of getting a phone number to someone on scene. I finally got a number and was able to speak to someone on scene. The male was cut down and we began CPR. Police got there on scene very fast and was able to take over. He was transported to the hospital, but eventually died. I was so hard on myself with the fact that if I didn't have to get a Spanish language line, or if someone on scene would have called, would we have saved him? I am 911. While I didn't take the call, I was listening, wired in. A girl calls and is frantic. The phone sounds like it is dropped on the ground. The next thing I hear is a loud punch. The girl picks up the phone and conveys she is okay and to not send help. The boyfriend steals the phone and proceeds to beat her while my CTO dispatched out PD. I'll never forget her screams, and I'll never know what the outcome was. I am 911. You were barely able to tell me you were shot in the neck. You could only tell me the subdivision you were at, with no exact location. I had to use my maps to get a general area of where you were. I listened to you cough up blood and tell me you're about to die. I had to tell you to stay where you are so I could help direct PD to you using their sirens. They finally located you about 10 minutes later. I felt helpless within that time. I never knew if you survived or not. All I know is you were transported to the hospital. I am 911. When I was in training, I took a call for a premature baby that was born. The baby was really early and did not survive. This was before my daughter was born. When my daughter was born, I was so grateful she was healthy and had no complications. Afterwards, the fear of SIDS set in and weighed heavy on me. I know someone that lost a child to SIDS. After she was born, I dispatched units or was working in the circle when a baby not breathing call went out. It stuck with me because that could happen to anyone. It hits close to home. To this day, any calls with kids or babies really hit me hard. I am 911. I remember my first day of call-taking training. I had to give CPR on an infant. It was my first CPR call, so I was already nervous, and it being a child made it that much worse. The baby ended up dying at the hospital. I always think about what might have happened if I did anything differently. I am 911. It was Christmas Eve and a fairly slow night. The call came in from a frantic mother. She said that her son is deaf and was in the garage. He said he was going to make another Christmas present. He was a woodworker. He was gone for a while, and they went to check on him. They found him on the ground, covered in blood. He had killed himself with his table saw. The entire time we were on the phone with the mother, you could hear the table saw was still on in the background. I am 911. I was recently released from training, and we got a call from a crisis center saying there was a pregnant female that was wanting to commit suicide. We had an officer respond, and turns out the female had left the center. She was 9 months pregnant, due to have a C-section tomorrow, and planned on cutting the baby out of her, killing the baby, and then killing herself. It was unknown where she might go, and was seen leaving on foot. Officers checked the area and were unable to locate the female and cleared. I asked the sergeant if I was able to ping her phone and spent my entire shift pinging the phone and contacting the proper agencies where her phone was showing. Right before my shift ended, she pinged in the neighboring state, and I called that local dispatch agency to let them know. She had history with that agency, and they checked the address she was known to frequent, which was close to where she was pinging. They were able to locate her, unharmed, and brought her to the hospital to have the C-section. I don't know what happened to the female, but I know that the baby is alive due to what happened that night, and is now 8 years old. I am 911. 5 minutes before the end of my shift, my phone rings. The person on the line was screaming. I could barely hear what she was saying. She gets closer to the phone and says that she thinks her husband killed himself. The female states that he is blue and not breathing. Something felt off, So I started asking her to clarify what she saw. Her husband was found in a chair in the garage with a bag over his head with tubing in it that was attached to a welding gas tank. He killed himself via a hazmat inhalation. I will never forget the screams, cries, and confusion in her voice. I am 911. During training, when I was new, I took a call from a guy who came home to his girlfriend screaming, crying, and bleeding from her wrist. He started crying, saying, "What did you do?" I handled it professionally, but after the call ended, I had to step out and cry because it made me think about my suicidal brother. I am 911. I received a call one night that a young lady was in a car not breathing. They were at an Exxon gas station and didn't know the complete address. After a few minutes of going back and forth about the address, I finally got the correct location to get help en route. In the meantime, she's still not breathing and is starting to turn blue. I'm now going through protocol and getting started with CPR. The female was on the phone, taking directions from me and giving those instructions to another man. She is now screaming at me that she is still not breathing. I'm still giving CPR instructions, but it's not working. Now, I'm so invested in the call, I feel like I'm right there. Now EMS has arrived, but she's still not breathing, but I can't stop giving instructions. EMS has now taken over, but I can't bring my emotions down. I thought she died because she wasn't breathing for so long. I ran out of the room and cried my eyes out until my supervisor came to check on me to let me know she did make it. And I did all I could to help save her life. I am 911. Help me. I can't breathe. I couldn't figure out who was with you or what the sound was in the background. It was like static. When you answered my question, "Are you alone?" and you said yes, it hit me. The static sound was your lungs, gurgling, crackling, static, and then you stopped talking. I encouraged you to answer one more question. Can you get your door unlocked? Your answer was no. We arranged for fire to conduct a forced entry, and all I did was encourage you to breathe. No more questions. All you need to do is breathe, I kept telling you. I was afraid the static sound would stop, but you fought through it, as I could hear your front door breaking. I heard the voice of the fireman and was so relieved they got to you. I never found out what happened to you or why your lungs failed so quickly and so tragically. Thank goodness you called. I know in my heart you survived, whether just in my imagination or in actuality, you survived. I am 911. I still think daily of the 4-year-old autistic child, Alex, whose mom didn't want him. That's my brother's name. He's also autistic, in the light of our lives. In hearing on the ops channel, an officer talking about mom giving them the runaround, saying her kid was in bed, but he was actually in the back of the ambulance. This was 2 weeks ago. He was found wandering the streets in just a diaper. I am 911. I answer the call, and all I can hear is screaming, agonizing, gut-wrenching screaming. I can't get through to her, but I can see she's by the river, so I send medical and police and keep trying. Finally, a bystander takes the phone and tells me that the woman's 4-year-old son went in the water and hadn't come out. He hands the phone back to her and leaves. All I can do is listen to her scream and cry and beg for her son until the fire department found her. It was my 3rd day of training. And the next month, I walked 2 mothers through CPR on their infants. Neither survived. I am 911. January 2nd, 2020. The mother called in, sounding intoxicated. She was calling to report a sexual assault. She met a man on 12/31/2019 who she bought drugs from. He then offered to babysit her 3-year-old son. When she came home on the 2nd, she noticed blood in his diaper, and his butt was all red. When I tried to send responders, she giggled, declined any help, and said never mind. She just wanted an info report. I think about that poor baby every single day. As a mother and victim of child sexual assault, that call rocks me. That mother's nonchalant attitude tears me apart. I am 911. I was in training, and the call was a cardiac call, my first ever over the phone. The woman finds her dad face down, cold to the touch, and I'm trying to instruct the caller through CPR, and her brother began performing CPR. However, the screams and pleads of the daughter to wake up sticks with me, and also brought a reality of losing a coworker, and his daughter found him. And when I arrived on scene, she was screaming and telling her dad to wake up, just like my caller. That call broke me down during dispatch training. I am 911. I had a lady who burned to death on the phone with me. She was bedbound, and her wheelchair caught fire. She asked me to pray with her while she burned to death. I will never forget the screams from the lady. This happened 20 years ago, and I have been in 911 for 25 years now. I am 911. I'm still new. I've only been on for 7 shifts with my CTO. But so far, the call that I've had a hard time with is a mom that called. She said she knows there was an accident in a common intersection. This was her son's way to school, and he was not answering his phone. She said he was driving a black Honda Civic. I see the accident in CAD. I see his car description and that he was in and out of consciousness and his head was bleeding. And the vehicle was in live power lines. I couldn't tell her anything. My heart broke for her. I have a son too. What hurt the most is I could not tell her anything. I am 911. I couldn't say this out loud because I'd never stop crying. It was the night of my sign-off. Each call was getting worse as the night went on. It was 2 a.m., and I get a call from a woman hysterically crying. Her 13-year-old son had shot himself in the head. His older brother and father passed the phone around. I could hear in the background them saying they knew he had been bullied on Facebook, but they didn't know it was that bad. I offered CPR instructions, and the mother told me if she pumped on his chest, his brains would fall out. On the recording, you can hear me choking back tears as I gasped. I apologized to her, and all I could hear was her heart breaking. I am 911. I received a call, and on the other line, the caller said, "This is Chief. My mom is choking. She has dementia. I need EMS and fire to the house quick." I couldn't get his address at first. He just kept saying, "She is dying." I get the address, send help, and when they arrive, I hear fire say, "Come on, Mrs. You can do it. Stay with me." EMS arrived, and I can hear the fire chief screaming and other personnel saying, "Stay with me." She ended up dying. She choked to death. Many times, I wondered what I could have done better. What could I have done more of? 25 years later, I still think about this call some days. The chief called me a few months later and thanked me for my help and said there was nothing more that we could have done. I am 911. For some reason, I handle suicide callers very well. I take comfort in meeting someone where they are, emotionally, and trying to guide them to see the better side. I am 22 years old, and one of the main questions that I've been chasing to find an answer to is, what is the purpose of life? This particular caller that I have, I believe it's about 2 a.m. in the morning. A male dials 911, and I'm the call taker that answers. Throughout our conversation, I hear a gun click in the background, and I ask him, what was that sound? He told me his plan to commit suicide, then proceeds to ask me, what is the purpose of life? That is the first time I couldn't answer a suicidal caller's question. I just got quiet, and luckily, PD arrived. This call lasted roughly about 15 minutes. However, it felt like I was on the phone for about 2 hours. I am 911. I'll never forget that call. February of this year, I took an overdose call. A mother called, told us her son took fentanyl. She was calm, like my mother, the night of my brother's overdose. I walked her daughter through CPR until help came. I will never forget the way his mother pled for her son's life. Months prior, I experienced the same event. My brother had done cocaine, laced with a deadly amount of fentanyl. My brother was lucky to make it, and I hope her brother was too. I still have nightmares that mix the events together. I still hear the gasps of my brother and the breaths of his sister as she performed CPR for 5 minutes straight. Months later, I vividly remember everything. I am 911. A female called in to report being violently sexually assaulted. She went into detail about the assault she experienced, and she was sobbing. It reminded me of my own sexual assault in a very similar situation. Halfway during the conversation, I had to do a traffic stop, and I apologized. Still sobbing, she said it was okay. I was just doing my job. By the end of the call, I realized the only reason she reported it was because he began to threaten her family. She wasn't concerned with the pain she endured. She was worried about everyone else. She just wanted someone to listen to her, and it hurt. I couldn't give her my undivided attention. I am 911. I had a woman call to tell me her daughter's friend was having a seizure. While on the phone with her, it led her to share concerns about the child's home life. These concerns made me add police to the EMD call. The caller was very emotional, so I reassured her by telling her she did the right thing. She responded by crying and thanking me profusely, saying she didn't feel like she was doing the right thing at first, but my words made her feel a lot better. Her reaction was shocking to me, but it made me realize the importance of being human with our callers. I am 911.
I hope it's okay. Mine's kind of a pair. This just happened back a few days ago. First call that I took in this pair was there's two big ones for me. It's kids and animals. Growing up on horse farms, those are kind of the big two that mess with me. And the first one was someone was driving through these people's neighborhood a little bit too fast. Neighbor's animal was out in the middle of the roadway, and they hit the dog and killed it pretty much immediately while the entire neighborhood was watching. And the caller was the owner of the animal, and they were trying to hold it together until right there at the end when I told them I was getting help out to him as fast as I could. And they started to break on me right as we ended the call. Probably about an hour later, I got a similar phone call. Someone else was driving through a neighborhood too fast. And this time, instead of a dog, they hit someone's kid. And I'm getting screams in the background, and the poor caller trying to hold herself together. She was a bystander that watched it happen. And it was someone's 17-year-old kid that they ran over so hard that when the police got there, the first thing they said is his legs are broken. I spent a good 5 minutes trying to get them to do CPR, but they kept telling me he was already gone. And the screams I was hearing was the mother out in the roadway holding her child, wailing, just trying to bring him back. We didn't get him out of the roadway. Police showed up, saw his legs were broken, and I knew that he was already gone. So, yeah, it was a pretty bad day for kids and animals that day.
Thank you.
So a lot of you know I'm new to this. I'm recently signed off, and this just happened this past weekend. I'm still processing it. I answered the phone, and it was a kid, and he was just screaming bloody murder. I had no idea what had happened, and he just kept saying, "No, mommy, no, mommy, no, mommy." They had found his mother, Blue, in her bedroom. They couldn't get to her, so they had to break in the door first. So they broke in the door, found her blue and stiff, and he was just inconsolable. And I can still hear his voice in my head. I'm a mother, and hearing him say, "I'm only 13. I can't live without you, Mommy," that just has stuck with me all weekend.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing.
So this one kind of sticks with me, primarily because it was super early on in my career. I was 22. We used to have a service window. And the call itself, not really that hard. It was a child who, he had been at the local pool, and his hearing aids got stolen. And for me, the reason it still sticks with me is because it was the first time that I lost faith in the rest of society. It's the call that, you know, you have that first call in your career where you go, "Oh God, people are terrible." And there was just something about it. At first, I couldn't understand him because he had a bit of a speech impediment because he didn't have his hearing aids in, and he couldn't speak very well. And it's funny, we were talking earlier, there's so many bad calls. And it's like, how do you choose which is the worst? And that by far is not the worst call I've ever dealt with. But it's the call that made me think less of everybody in the world. And it was just after that, I don't want to say it, I wasn't surprised by any other bad calls after that. Because it was just, if this stupid thing can happen to a small child that can't hear, what else is there? And not to say the rest of the calls didn't affect me, but that one, it was a moment.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
So I'm not new, but when I was new, like Deanna was, the second day after my sign-off, my phone went off, and there was a child on the phone and an adult screaming in the background. And the child couldn't have been more than 10 or 11. And I got the address from him, and I asked him what had happened. And he said they had come home from church and found his 15-year-old brother hanging in his room. Of course, it hit home for me. I have a 14-year-old daughter at home. This 10-year-old child and his sister, who couldn't have been more than 6 or 7, did not want to give up on their brother. So they had cut him down, and they wanted to do CPR. So over the phone, I gave them the instructions, which they followed to a T. And after every time they would breathe into their brother, they would gag or vomit. And I would hear that through the phone. Even now, 4 years later, I can still hear them on the other line, not wanting to give up. And I still kiss my daughter every night before she goes to bed, because that's probably the hardest call I've ever taken, because I worry that my 10-year-old could find her sister the same way.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing.
I had a call come in on night shift. I recognized the phone number. It was a good friend of mine's home. And when I answered the call, his son recognized my voice. He told me his father was laying on the floor. He had been having trouble breathing. Then man's wife got on the phone. We, of course, had everybody en route to give assistance. They lived out in the country, and the center was rather busy. I followed my protocols. His wife held the phone down to him, said, "It's John, talk to John." And I asked him if he was going to be okay. And he said, "I'll be okay." And I finished my protocol. I got off the phone. And when the first responder checked on scene, he happened to be a good friend. He came across the radio and said, "CPR in progress." They worked my friend for over 30 minutes on the ambulance on the way to the hospital, and they pronounced him at the hospital. And that's probably the worst call I've taken.
Thank you so much for sharing.
So my call is similar to hers, but it was the wife. She called and she said, "I need the police and EMS. I will be waiting on the porch when they get here." And so our catch-all, "Okay, tell me exactly what happened." She said, "I got home early from work, and my husband didn't know I was home. I walk in to surprise my husband that I was coming home early from work, and the door is ajar in our daughter's room, and their daughter was 3 months old. It was her daughter and his daughter. And she saw her husband sexually assaulting their 3-month-old daughter. And she went in her room. She was a licensed, legally owned a gun. She had her CCW, but she said she stood there frozen for a moment and she watched because she couldn't believe what she was seeing. She went in her room, got her gun out of the safe, and shot him, and she killed him. And she said, "I'm going to be waiting here for them." And she was like, "Did I do the right thing?" And I know we are not supposed to say yes or no. So I told her, "You did what you felt was necessary, and I'm going to stay on the phone with you until help gets there." And at that time, I was 6 months pregnant. So I can honestly say I did have that moment that you mentioned earlier. Am I burnt out? Is this profession still for me? I was very emotional already being pregnant with the hormones and all of that. And at that time, I was upset. And I was actually mad at the universe because I'm like, why would I get that call? I had a negative mindset at that time. Why would I get that call and I'm pregnant? Even though I didn't expect that type of behavior from my child's father, but I'm sure she didn't expect that type of behavior from her own husband, who they shared the child with. So that call, and to this day, it still kind of bothers me. Calls with children and elderly always get to me because they're defenseless. But that is a call that still stick with me.
So, God, this made me cry. I received a call last year from a husband, who called in and said that his wife had hung herself. During the call, I could hear 2 little kids in the background, under the age of 5. While going through the questions, the whole thing seemed very off to me. He was very calm the whole time he was talking. The kids just oblivious to whatever was going on. And when eventually we got to CPR, he walked off. I could hear the fire trucks coming. I could start to hear all the responders arriving. And as they were arriving, all I could hear was little kids saying, "Oh, there's a fire truck. Oh, there's a fire truck." I had no idea what had just happened to their mom. In the back of my head, I knew what had happened. And when the responders got there, eventually one of them actually called in the center and let me know what had happened. And I just told them, I said, "I don't care what happens." I said, "Just take care of those kids." He ended up killing her. He hung his wife. And still to this day, it's always a call that I just have never let go of, and it's always replayed in the back of my head. And it's like a lot of us in this room, when it comes to kids, that's just something I don't take lightly. So it's just, I never can let go of hearing those kids and just the thought of like them growing up and not knowing what happened. Thank you. To their mom one day, and that they grow up without a mom because he killed her. It's just, I don't know, it's something that I live without, or would live with, because I lost my dad at a young age, so to lose a parent is something that hits home for me.
Thank you. If you haven't heard it, I want to thank you for what you do in this profession. And if you haven't heard it, I'm proud of every single one of you and what you do in this profession. This is not an easy profession. We all know this. This is a hard thing. A few months ago, a friend told me that only 2 to 4% of the American population can do what you do. I thank you for being here. And even if you didn't share a story, damn it, thank you for being here in support of everyone who has. And maybe one day you also feel that you can share one in whatever capacity, whether it be something like this, a peer support session, submitting it anonymously, talking to your friends, talking to your family, talking to your coworkers, however you do it. I hope that one day you feel comfortable enough to do it, or inspired from those who shared today. And for those of you who shared a story where you lost a loved one, my condolences, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that you had to go through that. And a lot of these hard calls. It's what we do, right? You know, someone once said to me that we knew what we were signing up for. And I'm talking to this person because he was in my Imagine Listening session, and he said that we're just sharing for whatever and didn't really fully understand what it was that we were doing. And I said to him, if that's what you think, then you completely missed the point of us opening up and talking. And you, sir, are one who I feel, as jaded as you seem to be, is the one who is holding in the most. And he stood there, and then he shared, without realizing he was sharing, and proved my point. And it wasn't me like, oh, I was right. No, it wasn't that. I was glad that he shared, even if it was just one-on-one. And he's like, you know what, you're right. I have been holding in some stuff. And then he understood afterwards. I just want you to know that this is okay, because for a long time, it seemed like we were not allowed to feel. You just take that call and you go to the next one. You suck this shit up and you just continue doing what you do. Well, it's a new day. And we're talking, we're sharing, we're learning from each other. We're reflecting, and we're making this a lot better place. Not just for us now, but anybody who comes in after us. It'll be a lot better. So thank you, all of you, for what you do and for being here, sharing, and supporting. A round of applause for those who shared, please.
And we are back. And again, thank you so very much to everyone that was there, to everyone who shared a story. And if you didn't share a story, it is okay. Just the fact that you were there in support of each other, that is what it is all about. And if you ever need to, reach out. There are people out there to help. There are so many more resources now than years back. And again, it was awesome to be in there with so many folks, especially those who know what it is like to take some of these hard, gut-wrenching calls, and also to see some of these 911 professionals kind of break down, get emotional, and have their coworkers come over, hug them, rub their back, pull them in, letting them know that it's okay. That was amazing. And it was so good to see. So again, all of you, thank you for what you do and for being there for each other. It was an amazing moment, powerful, as always in the Imagine Listening sessions, but especially those recently that I did out there. So thank you, all of you. This broadcast has been sponsored by InDigital, a leader next-gen core services. And again, a shout out to subscribers of the podcast. Thank you so very much. If you have any comments, questions, or you ever want to be a guest in the flagship show, you can email us, and that is going to be wttpodcast@gmail.com. Once again, that is wttpodcast@gmail.com. You can follow on social media, and you can so many different things that you can do, but the easiest way to do that is to simply go to links.co/WTT podcast. And that's links with 2 I's.co/WTT podcast. And you'll find everything there, my email, all of my social media, where to follow, where to listen to the latest episode, where you can also schedule an episode to be a guest on this podcast with me. Whether you are new, whether you are seasoned, or you are retired in the 911 profession, I would love to have you on the podcast. I've been doing this for over a decade, and this is my passion. This is what I've been doing. And, all of it started from my own struggle. And once I started sharing those stories, it was therapeutic, having others come on and being therapeutic for them as well, people listening and just learning, but also from some of those stories being inspired, motivated to join the Thin Gold Line as well. All of it. Your story matters, and one voice can change the world. One voice, your voice, can change the world. And even if you don't think that your voice can change the world, just think about this. It can change the world of your caller, those on the other side of the radio, and those around you. And even if you feel as though what you do is simply a drop in the water. Just remember that when that drop hits the water, there are ripples, and that is where your impact lies. So thank you once again for everything that you do. You can find a link on there to be a guest on the show. Just simply scroll down. Once you go to links.co/WTT podcast, you'll find the link there. And then underneath that, there's also a link for over 250 hours of free continuing education for 911 professionals. Also, where you can purchase Imagine Listening 2 and Imagine Listening Volume 1. My version will be coming out within the next couple of months. And I'm very excited for all of you to see that. And then finally, any podcast or dispatch merchandise that you're looking for, you can find it all there again. One last time, links with 2eyes.co/WTT podcast. You'll find everything there. This can be seen on Facebook, YouTube, as well as X and LinkedIn Live. You can find some videos and everything on TikTok and Instagram as well. Once again, if you go to that links.co, you'll find everything there. And then to listen 24/7, you can listen on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, your favorite podcasting app, and withinthetrenches.net. Have a good one, everyone, and we will see you all in the next one.